Recording in progress.
Cool. Hello, everybody. I'm George Brown Eyes. You already know me, and I am graced with the presence of Rachel Ann, who is, in my opinion, one of the authorities. Not that that's my favorite word, but I mean, she is kind of the. If I have a donkey question or a burro question, I'm firing off a message or an email to Rachel, and um, she's just wonderful. And we're going to be talking about um, kind of the do's and don'ts of your first donkey, your first burro. And for the first time adopter, it's like maybe you've had horses, maybe you haven't, but this is your first donkey burro, whether it be a mini or a mammoth, whether it be domestic or wild. And so we're just going to be talking long ears for a while and more of a conversation than an interview between friends. So Rachel, kind of tell people everything, not everything, but some of the important things, the big things about you.
Yeah, so like George said, my name is Rachel Ann, and I run a nonprofit called Hee Haw Halfway House, Donkey Rescue and Education. And my goal is to rescue and rehab, retrain donkeys and then get them rehomed. So a lot of R's in there. But what I do, I have a very small property, unlike George has a big one. And so the way that I get a lot of animals into homes is I bring them in between 1 to 5 at a time, and I put a lot of time into them. And my goal is to get the animals to the point where somebody can adopt them and keep them and they retain their training. And so I'm putting a lot of time into each animal before they go out. And then as soon as an animal graduates out and into an adoptive home, I bring in more animals. So my background is actually in hunter jumper back in Virginia. I never would have thought I'd be into donkeys or burros in the first place. That's a totally kind of a wild, like I segued from horses into mules and mules into donkeys, like so many of us do. But then I discovered riding donkeys, and that was it for me. I just fell in love with them. And I just seem to get along with them really well. So I've started out with a training business, and it segued into rescue just because so many donkeys need rescue and people kept on giving them to me. So I finally created a nonprofit. And so I also have a degree in equine science from CSU. And like I've said before, that's pretty much good for flipping burgers. But I do actually use my degree quite a bit. I also manage a therapeutic and non-adaptive horseback riding program at Laughing Buck Farm, which also has a nonprofit. It doesn't belong to me. But so I work in 2 different nonprofits and really enjoy that world. And my whole life is about horses, mules, and donkeys. That is my whole life. We do get in quite a few feral BLM burros in my program, and I've worked in other programs with other rescues that needed a trainer for their BLM donkeys. And so I have quite a bit of experience training these guys from zero and from completely untouched to being able to do things like pack. And I just love them. Whether it's domestic or a BLM burro, I mean, they're my favorite creatures on earth. The way that George is so passionate about his Mustangs, that's the way I feel about all donkeys and mules. And so while I love horses, the long ears have my heart. I also have a whole book series on keeping and training donkeys. So it's been my life, and I'm really honored to be chatting with you this morning, George.
Yeah, and I've gosh, I probably had a dozen, maybe 18 long ears. Most BLM burros, but a handful of domestic as well come through here. So I have a hard time saying no to a long ear. Um, I've been avoiding a mammoth donkey because I know if a mammoth donkey came in here, they would stay here with me for life because I grew up with a mammoth donkey. He used to put his head down and I'd straddle his head and hold on to his ears, and he'd raise his head up, and I'd slide down his neck and be on his back, and
Oh.
and no halters, no nothing. We would just kind of go wander around wherever he wanted to go. I just rode on his back, but it was a fun way to grow up. I had a little barrel racing. I didn't do barrel racing. She was a retired barrel racing horse, and then a mammoth donkey, and that was my life. I was looking forward to getting home from school just so I could be with them, because I kind of was bullied a bit when I was in school. So I love my
Same
mammoth
experience.
donk, and I love my horse. So, and my dogs. But anyhow, I think Rachel and I probably have a lot of the same background, where I found it's harder to retrain a poorly trained donkey than it is to start an untrained donkey or burro. That a clean slate is a lot, and again, it depends on the animal, but all in all, it's a cleaner slate when you're starting with something that hasn't been messed up. Because usually most of the rescues that come in, I mean, some are just people get old and they can't care for their horse or donkey anymore, but a lot of them are just basket cases because they've been poorly handled or neglected or abused. And that's one of my goals with this, focusing on my starter kit, is how do we do it right in the beginning so we avoid, I would love to put myself out of a job, at least as far as on the rescue side. I would love not to be in a position where I'm having to rescue neglected or poorly trained animals. So, and that, you're starting the donkey book is phenomenal. I haven't had the opportunity to read your other two, but um, the starting the donkey book is amazing. I'd highly recommend anybody that has long ears to get that book from Rachel, and we'll get Rachel to share the links where they can get her books. And anyhow, you can maybe delve into that a little bit on,
Yeah.
because to do it right is a lot easier than to do it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I completely agree. It is way easier to say start a donkey that just hasn't been touched, as opposed to one that has been handled and been handled in either a rough way or an inexperienced way. It doesn't even have to mean that the animal was abused. It could just mean that the animal is accustomed to avoiding people in some way. So it could just be that every time a person came in that paddock, they were allowed to walk away. That's harder to handle than an animal that's never seen a person, because whatever they do becomes a habit, right? So George was talking about my book. I'll share it because I have one here. So this is, I'll stick my nose over it, my Starting the Donkey book. And this, I have 3 books, but this one is nice. Let me see here. This is a good page to share. So you can see that I have actual step-by-step illustrated instructions in here. So I actually trained some rescue donkeys for this book, some of which were BLM burros, and I videoed myself, use the photo sequences to create lesson plans with step-by-step visual instructions. And then all the animals that I trained in this book went on to awesome homes, as they got to be the star of the book, and then they went to awesome homes. The other book that I really suggest for starting out owning donkeys is this one, which is my ownership journey book. And this one is particularly, it's specifically about how to care for donkeys. So this also has quite a bit of photographic illustration on everything that you might need. And it goes over nutrition and feeding and care, supplements, different minerals, nutrients, all of the particular disease processes that donkeys tend to get as opposed to other equids. So it's just kind of a really great starter. Like those 2 are great starter books. My other book is on saddle donkeys. So it's popular, but it's not the most bought book because not everybody has a donkey that they want to ride or that's big enough for them to ride. But it goes over all the beginning steps of, you have a donkey that you can catch and handle, but you've never ridden it. How do you train it to ride? So all of these books can be bought on my website, which is heehawhalfwayhouse.com. And my website is actually getting redone. So in the next month or so, we should be able to actually buy them from the website as opposed to Venmo and PayPal, which is going to be awesome. It may still have to go through a Venmo PayPal process, but you can actually buy it on the website, which is really cool. My whole website's getting a facelift, which is awesome. But either way, let's just delve in a little bit into kind of the starting donkeys. And when you get a donkey, say you have one that is either unhandled or poorly handled, what do you do? And so I'm not going to be able to go through all the steps. Obviously, that's why I wrote a book on it. Basically, people kept on asking me questions on this, and I was writing out essays to people and or getting on the phone for hours. And I'm like, I can't keep on doing this. I work like between 6 to 7 days a week. I don't have time. So that's why I wrote the books in the first place. And actually, I didn't have the rescue at that point. I wrote the books on my own time, like literally when I was sitting on the toilet or in the bath, I'd be like typing out these books and training the animals in my free time as well, because they needed to be done anyway. I used all of the profits and proceeds from the books originally to start my nonprofit. So I did a true pull myself up by the shoelaces, or by the buckles or whatever you call that, with these books in order to start a rescue, because it's not inexpensive to do. And I don't have a bunch of high-end funders giving me money. So I had to figure out a way to get this started. And being, financially responsible and fiscally responsible in rescue is very important to me, especially with a lot of the issues you see with rescues closing down and having neglect because they have too many animals that they can't afford. It's really important to me to show that we can be fiscally responsible and take good care of our animals. So that's my little plug for rescues. But yeah, let's delve into like the training of these animals. One of the things that I say to everybody who gets in a new donkey that say isn't well handled or hasn't been handled is you need a catch pen. It's so important. All it takes is a couple panels. I know panels are expensive, but that's part of the process. These animals are not inexpensive. And so having either a stall that you can, herd your animal into and or get them used to going into for food, or a few panels in a corner that you can herd the donkey along the fence line and into it is so important for handling them. If you give them access to a space that's big enough for them to walk away, and they will, you've now trained them to walk away from you. So that's just really important. You have to not give them that option. It's a little different than working with horses where you can round pen them and you can send them away and that will draw them in. That doesn't work with donkeys super well. They'll go around a few times, they'll stare at you, and then they'll run off. They can learn to kind of come into you like a join up, but that comes with more trust. And later on in the process, it's not the same as with horses. So actually a round space that allows them to move more is harder to work in than a space that has corners. You want the corners in order to stop them. So it's a very different in terms of the way their brain works. It's a little different. They're very black and white thinkers. I was diagnosed with autism a few years back, which in retrospect, looking back at my childhood was really obvious. I've learned to mask very well and handle social interactions really well, so long as I know what the social interaction is going to be, and have some control and agency in it. But it really makes me so that it's like, this makes sense to me in terms of the black and white thinking of the burros and the donkeys. They're very much, it's either this way or this way. Your behavior has to be obvious as to what you want from them. It has to make sense to them in terms of their thinking and their behaviors. And they have to feel like you're consistent, you're kind, you're safe, and you make sense. And if you do those things when you're working with them, they're super happy to work with you. But that involves learning how to read their body language, which is why in my book, in my the training book, I have a whole section on donkey behaviors and facial expressions, because reading those is really important, and they're slightly different than horse facial expressions. So there's some things that they share, both being equines, and there's some things that are different. And George, you can always chime in if you want on
Yeah.
something that you notice is
Yeah.
different.
Well, what I found, and people look at me funny because most people come from the horse world, not the donkey world. I
Mhm.
have found with Mustangs, they're closer behavior wise to a donkey than they are to a domestic horse. And
Interesting.
I think it's from living out in the wild for hundreds of years, but I've had much more success in a square pen than I have in a round pen with a Mustang. Because a
That's
Mustang, you
super.
round pen them, this is a horse that'll go 20 to 40 miles a day. So
Mhm.
you think an hour in the round pen is going to phase them? No, they're just like, okay, I'm just going to put myself into autopilot and wake me up when you're done. So I've found a lot more square pens, and I've got this pen I'm in here now is a 30 by 40, but you can't see it, it's off screen, but I've got panels so I can make the 30 by 40 into a 12 by 12.
Mhm.
And same idea, then you're in a closer, shorter space, and you can, if time is of an essence and you need to get them used to being touched and stuff, you be on the outside of the panels and kind of squeeze it in so the horse will hopefully not jump, but will get acclimated to touch without continuing to run away. So almost the same thing with the donkey. So I found almost more similarities in donkey training with Mustangs than I have with traditional
Mhm.
natural horsemanship with Mustangs.
That's
So
super interesting because I didn't know that.
yeah,
I've worked with a few Mustangs that were already trained,
yeah,
that were gentle enough to be in lesson programs and loved them,
yeah.
but they don't have any experience. I've worked with some feral horses that didn't, they weren't Mustangs though. They came in off a range having been bred and not ever touched. But that's not the same thing as having bred out on the range, and really had natural selection for those qualities that make them so amazing and hardy out in really tough conditions. Um, they just have to be incredibly intelligent animals. And because they really have been selected for that as opposed to our selection and breeding. So that's super interesting for me to hear. I didn't know that, George.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, and here it is, brain fog, but Nikki, Nikki Creasy looked at me and she goes, "You're training those Mustangs like I train donkeys." And I'm like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then I started bringing on BLM burros, and she goes, "You'll do great with them." And I'm like, "Because you already working them, mostly the way you work with don." So that was like, huh, okay. And I just kind of found that out through trial and error. But yeah, there's no round pen on my property. There's just square pens of various sizes. And again, I think donkeys and Mustangs, I think trust is much higher on their list of priorities than a domestic, which is like, okay, I'm going to go along to get along.
Hmm.
But a long ear of any variety or a Mustang are like, I ain't doing anything for you until I can trust you. Until you're
Hmm.
trustworthy, good luck. You can still train through submission and you can end up with a well broke because their soul, for lack of another word, has been broken. And then you just end up with a push button zombie horse. But
Hmm.
that's not what I want. If I'm out on the range, I want a horse that's at least as smart as me because I may be dumb enough to put us in a bad situation. I want that horse to be smart enough to get me out of it. So I I I want to keep these, whether it be a donkey or a Mustang, I want their essence to remain intact. And we're just gonna layer on or expand that with all the benefits of domestication without taking away any of the benefits of wild side.
I
So
completely
I
agree.
don't.
And I feel like what you're talking about is also helping them retain their agency in
Mhm,
making
that's a good word.
choices. So, for instance, when I'm talking about like putting them in a square pen and not giving them a choice to leave, right? That sounds terrible. Like I am just like forcing them into the situation. But what I'm doing, similar to what you were saying, is I'm acclimating them. So
Mhm.
basically, yes, they're not allowed to leave that situation, but I'm watching their behavior. And if they feel like they're going to climb my panels, we're starting on the outside of that pen with me just hanging out with them. And I'm going to give them food in there. And I'm just going to hang out there, sit on a bucket, play on my phone, sing along to my tunes, muck around, whatever I'm doing, and move around them until they feel comfortable with me getting closer and closer and closer. And oftentimes when I suggest a small pen or a catch pen to work with these animals, my first suggestion is feed them in there. Make that a really positive place. Make sure that place is always positive. They should never fear going into a training pen. That should not cause them anxiety.
Mhm.
It should be like, this is the place where I go to get delicious things when I do tasks. So it should be like the most positive. I feel the same way about hoof trimming because I do a lot of training animals to pick up their
Mhm.
feet that have never done it before and or they're very scared to because something bad has happened. I mean, you go to touch them and they shake and almost fall to the ground scared.
Mm.
And that's hard to see. But if you go, oh, that poor baby, right? That doesn't help anything. What I can do is I can retrain the wiring in their brain that when I touch near their hip, they get something good. When I touch near their hock, they get something good. When I get a rope around a very soft cotton rope, not roped, but just around, looped around their leg,
Mhm.
they get something good. When I lift and they put up their foot, even if it's in a kick, they get something good. Then we shape that behavior till it's calm.
Mhm.
And then basically everything I do, like especially with hoof trimming and hoof handling, because that seems to be the most stressful thing, we're taking away their way to move away. We're taking away their means of escape, and we're taking away their weapons, right? And especially with our BLM burros, what I've found is the back legs are easier to pick up. And the reason for that is back legs are defensive, right? So if they're kicking with their back leg, it's because the threat is behind them. If we're picking up a front leg, that's where another donkey or a predator would actually take them out and kill them, is with the tendons in the front leg or near their
Mm.
chest. So if you watch them either fight or play fight, they grab each other by the front legs and take each other down to the ground, and that can actually take them out as opposed to a back leg where they can kick and leave. So one of the things I noticed with our BLM burros especially, but sometimes with the domestics too, and really the BLMs have taught me that I need to be more aware of this with our domestic donkeys, is that that front part of the front leg on their upper arm, basically, essentially, is actually one of the more sensitive places and one of the more scary places to be touched,
Mm.
because that is a spot where if something grabs them, they might die. So that spot in particular, when I'm asking for a donkey to pick up their front legs, I actually avoid that front spot. I don't reach down there. I'll go straight to putting a rope around the bottom of the leg
Mm.
to pick up, and I won't touch with my hands and I won't reach down. I'll start by standing up and using the rope and standing a little bit away or back towards their middle or hip, because I am now not in a position where I'm grabbing them like another donkey or a jack or a predator. That's a very sensitive, that chest and front legs are really sensitive. And so you would think that the hind end is actually the scarier end. It's not, it's the front end, because you're taking away their offense and their ability to actually protect themselves and attack, as opposed to being behind them at their defense. And so what I want to do when I'm working with animals with their feet is I want them to come in thinking about lifting their feet for the farrier like it's the best pedicure in the world, like they're coming in for a spa treatment. It should
Right.
feel that relaxing. And it's not going to start that way at all. But that's my goal, is I want them to come in and I can be like, yeah, we're going to give you the best spa treatment ever. You're going to get delicious things. You're going to be treated beautifully. You get your butt scritches. Like everything's going to be awesome. We're never going to cause any stress, right? We want to get to that point with them where they're relaxed, because there's no point in continuing to um, allow a behavior that's stressy. because that's where they'll go and that's what will continue in their brain. If you stay in that heightened state of arousal, that's what they learn. So being able to push those boundaries enough that you're getting to the behaviors you want without causing extreme stress is really kind of all I do on a daily basis with these animals. And it takes very small increments, but
Mm-hmm.
taking your time with those small increments, breathing, taking breaks and
Mm-hmm.
relaxing and just breathing with the animal, which I know you do. I see you do it. Those things are the most important things in your training, and it will speed up your training significantly if you just take your time, right? And if you have good timing, which is, of course, hard to teach. So
Yes.
that's something where you have to know and you have to work with animals, and it's best to actually work with a trainer if you can, who has good timing, so you can see it, even if it's just with domestic horses, learning releases at the right time, learning when to push and when to step back is so important, because if you stay and you put pressure on an animal too long, you've undone everything that you were trying to do. So all these things kind of sound esoteric. I mean, you understand them. They might sound esoteric to somebody else, and it's a little hard to go into specifics without more time, but maybe that's something we can talk about at some point, or you can make a video about, or I could make a video about just that timing of where you take the pressure off and how much pressure do you put on, and watching the behaviors and the facial expressions and body language is just essential to that. So spending as much time as you can just observing your animals and observing their facial expressions, observing their interactions without doing anything with them is also really essential to being a good trainer.
That is so true. And yeah, a lot of times it's the time between what we're doing ends up being more important than when we're doing something. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's when the donkey or the Mustang is kind of processing it and letting it go in. And whether it be a first touch, you want people get greedy. They get that first touch on a donkey or a horse, and then they want to linger there. And that first touch should be maybe a second, and then you walk away.
Exactly.
Don't get greedy. More than anything, don't get greedy. And I always joke. I wish I would have known donkeymanship and horsemanship when I was a kid more so than now, because it it's relationship building, whether it be a donkey, a horse, or a human. Don't get greedy. Don't ask for too much too soon, and just take your time, baby steps, and do it right. You know, you don't build a concrete foundation in an hour. It takes days and days for it to cure and set up. So all that foundation stuff is so important, and you got to give it the time.
It's what you're saying is so important, just because we we do live in a time where people video a lot of their training, and you'll see trainers who work with horses that are like, they get the horse in the round pen in an hour, they're on them and they're go, 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 right? And so the horse literally has no time to process. And maybe they're effective at getting things done, but what's going on with that horse, right? And so imagine if you're in a school setting, you're learning something, and somebody is literally having you do things so fast that yes, you're getting through it, but did you actually learn any of it?
Hmm.
Right? So think about the way these animals interact with each other. It's not fast most of the time. Most of the time is very slow. It's maybe done at a distance, or like you said, with relationship building, with just body language and just moving around and just really watching the whole herd in relation to each other. And so you're taking a herd animal out of that situation, putting them in a stressful situation where they can't escape. And now your things are being thrown at them until they go, okay, well, I guess this is the only way to survive. And they just capitulate. And we see that, and it looks really exciting. And it looks like just amazing. We're like, wow, look at that trainer got that horse to do that in like an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. And it's exciting to watch, right? It's emotional. It's high energy. Really good foundational training with animals that involves relationships should be very boring to watch.
Hmm.
Everything should be
Absolutely.
boring.
I,
And
I
that's a problem, because our society wants excitement and
yeah,
fast.
They
and instant gratification. And that is not how this works,
yeah.
right?
I've always said I'm the most boring trainer on the planet, and that's why I wear Hawaiian shirts and a crazy hat most of the time, to at least compensate for being that boring.
Just
But
spice it up a little.
yeah, a little. But I'm just well, hi guys.
Ew.
Hello, can you see them back there?
Oh, they're
Yeah,
just so cute.
yeah,
That head hanging behavior where they put a head over, I think that's what they're doing, putting their head
yeah,
over each other is that's them
yeah,
saying, "You're mine."
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
friendship thing.
I'm pretty sure these two boys are brothers from a different mother. I'm pretty sure they had the same father. They're
Okay.
same age, so similar, but anyhow, they will not leave this property unless they leave together. They
No.
are a bonded pair.
And
Absolutely
these two
bonded.
are now they're allo grooming.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's their mutual grooming. I love that they're
Yeah.
showing that because not only does that mean that they're strengthening their bond by grooming each other, but they're doing it right next to you, which means that they've just dropped all their guards in order to care for each other in your presence, which means they're really comfortable with you.
Yeah. And they I've never had to catch these boys. They catch me, which is the ultimate you want, is when they come and catch you and they're like, well, we had breakfast. Can we go out now? And I'll let them out after this conversation, and they'll run around and play. And I've got a couple of horses that play with them, and um, then they'll be asking to come in for evening. They stay in overnight while the horses are out, or they're my weather forecasters too. They'll show up in one of the pens with shelters, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it's gonna rain. You guys want to stay in? Okay, so
They're weather burros.
yeah, they are the weather burros. Yep. But anyhow, I just love that they are showing this because it's just an example of this is the result you want with your aunt, whether it be the burros or whether it be your horses, that they'll stand with you and they'll just do horsey things or burro things, whether it be grooming or resting his head on them. So
Well, and
yeah,
that just shows too that you haven't pushed your agenda on them
yeah,
so much because oftentimes if somebody only goes into the pen to do something with their animal specifically, then the animal they might like the person, they might enjoy the training, but anytime you walk into the pen, they're like, okay, what's going to happen next? What am I going to
yeah,
need to do? As opposed to showing natural behaviors, which your donkeys are showing, which is to still be there, but be doing their donkey things together. But the other really important thing that this is showing, and I love that they were showing the allo grooming, is that donkeys in particular need other donkeys.
yes,
So they are not horse companions. They can do okay in that role, but the way that I explain it, and I've explained it in the past, is it's kind of like if say you were on a deserted island, desert. I almost said desert island. I'm like, oh, imagining like
that's
all
the
sorts
island
of
I want.
delicious things on this island. I'm like, oh, yum. Okay, no, if you're on a deserted island with your Hawaiian shirt, right?
Yeah,
And because of course, and you didn't have a single other person, but there was a turtle there or a tortoise or something. There's another living thing there, and it's the only other living thing there that you can maybe communicate with. And you start to develop a relationship with this tortoise or turtle. Eventually, that would become your companion, right? Because you don't have anything else. You would have a really good relationship with this tortoise or turtle, which I mean, not at all to rag on people who have a really special relationship with their reptiles, because reptiles are awesome. And I also really love all reptiles. I used to keep snakes and I just think they're super cool. But just as an example, right? That shouldn't really take the place of human relationships because we also need human relationships in our
mhm,
life, right? As much as I say I'd much rather just spend time with my animals, I think over time I would be deficient mentally because I wouldn't have relationships with people, because those are important as well for being healthy. It's the same thing if you were to put a donkey in with a horse. It's one of them speaks Spanish and one of them speaks Portuguese. They have different body behaviors and different needs. And
mhm.
so, yes, it can work and they will eventually, get along and be fine. And donkeys that were raised with horses might think they're a horse, but is that really kind to them mentally and physically to not have other donkey companions? And my answer to that is always no. Beyond that, donkeys do not have the same diet requirements as horses. So they're probably pretty close to your Mustang diet requirements,
Hmm.
or you can imagine them as the most Cushing's, PPID, laminitic
Founder.
pony, foundered pony. That is how you have to feed them. So
Yeah.
if they're on a horse diet, say you have them in with your old thoroughbred, that animal's going to get obese, or your thoroughbred is going to wither away to nothing. It'll be emaciated if you're feeding your donkey correctly. So a lot of the donkeys I see are extraordinarily overweight and they don't need to be. And it's a management issue. That is your management issue as an owner. That is not an issue with the donkey. That's about you learning and changing your management to be correct for that animal. They really should be living with other donkeys. They should not be out on lush pasture. They need to have 1.5% of their ideal body weight, right? And low NCS hay and feed. And
Yeah.
that's non-structural carbohydrate, something, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I write it down all the time and then forget it. But basically, no simple sugars or low simple sugars and carbohydrates. So they just have a very different diet requirement than horses, and it's very hard to keep the two together. For instance, I have a giant mammoth donkey on the same diet as a very small older pony that needs a very low energy diet, right? He also has donkeys and mule companions in his pen as well to give him choices, but the horse does really well. What I've seen is horses do really well in with a couple donkeys or next to a couple donkeys if they have the same diet requirements. They seem to do pretty well. You know, generalizing to that donkey can be a good companion. Donkeys don't generalize well, right? And so it to them, it's different. And I really push that all the time, that they're not cow companions, they're not sheep companions, they're not horse companions, they're not goat companions. And in fact, they oftentimes will attack smaller animals than them.
Hmm.
And they could be fine for years and all of a sudden go on a killing spree with your sheep. So really thinking about like these guys, they're going to protect themselves. They're not going to protect your herd. And every time I say that, somebody comes in, well, my great grandmother's pappy did this back in their day. And I'm like, yes. And now that we know better, we do better, right? For
Yes.
animals, for multiple reasons. Just because it's worked doesn't mean it's okay, right? It's just the same thing as like, oh, you can let your kid crawl all over your big old dog and pull its ears and tail over and over and over again. Oh, it's nothing ever bad has happened. Well, until they end up in the hospital with a bite on their face because they didn't listen to the dog's body language and they thought the growling was cute, right? So it's the same sort of thing. Like it's okay until it's not. And that's what I always caution people. And yet this myth of the guardian donkey persists. And still people call and message me asking for donkey companions for their elderly horses. And it drives me up the wall a little, but it gives me a chance to educate. And
Yeah.
I try to do so in a really kind manner. Because my goal really is to educate and not to judge, which can be very hard when you have animals coming in from really tough situations. All the time. You know, it can be tough to be in that situation and also have a lot of empathy for these owners that are giving up their precious animal because they just can't do anything with it anymore. They get too old, the animal's in really rough shape. That can be really hard. And I always have like, there's no shame surrenders. I do not ever shame anybody. And when I do talk about these animals in a public space, about their struggles or neglect, I tell people we are not going to blame the owner for this. This is not appropriate ever because the owner has actually given the animal into a situation that's better. It'd be great if they did it earlier, but that's the only critique I'll make because I just otherwise people will not they will not give up their animals when they really need to. It's so important that people feel comfortable doing that in order to help more animals. So
Yeah.
I just segued into like 3 different topics there.
That's
Sorry,
that's
but
fine. I'm the same way. I just like I'm like strap in because I don't know where this conversation is going, but it's all going to be about donkeys.
well, and my thing is I get up on my soapbox. I feel as you can tell, I feel
Yeah.
very passionate about the care of these animals and the keeping of these animals and making sure that they're in really good situations for themselves and for the owners. And part of that is we really need to work on educating people on their care, their keeping, and their training, the more animals that people feel comfortable working with, and when you can get the owners themselves to feel comfortable and feel like they have also agency and that they can be successful in getting their animals trained and trusting them. If you give them tools to do that, that are easy to understand and follow, which is what my books are about, that these are really about making it easy and digestible. And I'm not using a whole bunch of terminology that is going to confuse you. It's going to be very simple. I will use terminology that is used in the horse world, and I'm going to explain it in layman's terms, because to me, it's super important that we make this accessible to people, because that keeps animals in homes.
Yeah.
When the people feel that they have a connection with the animal, that their animal is listening to them, understanding them, they can care for it appropriately, they can feel safe around it, the animals feel safe around them, and they understand each other, now you have an animal that has a home for life, as opposed to an animal that somebody's frustrated with. And I see it all too often, and I end up getting them at the end of that process, like you do, oftentimes, where people have tried and tried and tried, they've failed. And it's not for lack of trying. Well, now we've got an animal that is extraordinarily hard to work with because people have failed over and over again, even though they meant well. And so, like you said, doing it properly the first time makes all the difference in the world. And that's hard because people want to try, and it comes from a place of care and love. But educating yourself before you get into these animals is so important. I don't know how many people contact me and say, well, I don't know anything about donkeys, but I'm getting a donkey. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is a life you're talking about. These are
A very
lives.
long life too.
Yeah,
You're
like a
talking 40,
40-year-old
50.
life. Yeah, they can
Yeah.
live into their 50s maybe if you
You
take
better
good
put
care
them
of
in
them.
your will. You better put them in your will.
Exactly. Going back to our tortoises, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
You might have to put them in your will. You definitely will. And unless you get your tortoise at like age 1. But these guys live a long life. They can suffer immensely in the wrong care. And if you really do care about them and you have a love for animals, learning about it and setting things up properly, that means having a truck and trailer that's appropriate for your animals so you can get them to care if you need to, get them out in case of an emergency, get them to a vet. Having a good relationship with a mobile vet that can get out to you or that you can get to them before you get the animals, making sure they understand how to care for that type of animal and like that type of animal, because believe it or not, they can really tell if you like them. It makes a huge
Mm-hmm.
difference. I have a vet that I love using because they always come out and rub their ears before they do
Mm,
anything
yeah.
with them. And that makes a big difference in how they react to the vet, right? So the vet knowing and caring about them, making sure you have appropriate fencing, a good dry lot to keep them off your grass, right? Or can become a dry lot quickly when they eat it down, right? Within the first 2 days. Having good access to water that also has heat so you can get it plugged in. You don't have to break ice all winter, which is a serious issue. You really want that. Having a good shelter that they can get in out of the weather, making sure that they have a buddy that's appropriate for them, right? Making sure you have the correct hay and you're prepared with that. Making sure you have a setup where you have a first aid kit and you understand how to use what's in it. Making sure you have a checklist of these things are emergencies if you notice them. And donkeys love to hide when they're sick. So by the time you notice disease processes, oftentimes it's too late or it's very far along in the disease process. So where a horse would be throwing themselves on the ground with colic, the donkey is eating slower, right? So by the time the donkey's doing that, they're dying, right? Because
Mm.
they're gonna hide it. And I imagine Mustangs are the same way. They probably hide things more than domestic horses in terms of diseases. So you have to actually have even a better eye for these things. And you have to notice and watch your animal's normal behavior in order to see any abnormalities and catch them. At this point, I can almost sense just a disturbance in the force if somebody's not doing well. It's like a sixth sense almost, but it's because
Oh, it
I've
is.
watched a lot of behaviors, right? And you do too. You spend so much time with your herd. You know when an animal isn't feeling well from a distance without hardly looking at them. You wake up in the morning, you look out, you're like, their position in the herd isn't the same. I can tell
Yeah,
there's something
or they're
potentially wrong. And that's
laying.
where you want to get to,
Yeah.
right? And all those things are so important before you ever bring home an animal. And yes, there's things you're going to have to learn through experiencing them, but don't make it at the expense of the animals. Learn it beforehand. Go volunteer at a rescue. Go volunteer or help out at a barn. Learn these things. Take lessons, right? Take riding lessons, take, groundwork lessons. Learn these things before you bring the animals home. Please learn them because those things are so important before you ever bring your animals home. And it'll mean that you're going to have a better relationship. You're going to do things much better the first time, even if it's a little awkward. You're going to have much better success and you won't have your animals suffering. That's my
And
soapbox.
that's the big thing. But it is amazing. And I highly recommend, just like you said, wherever your local rescue is, reputable. Let me throw air quotes around that, reputable rescue, because boy, I've volunteered at a couple of sketchy ones. I'll tell you what, I think we all have,
Yeah.
but it's still a learning experience. You learn what not to do,
Hmm.
instead of what to do. But anyhow, it's um the time, in any time you're spending with your donk or your Mustang or horse or pony or whatever, it's just it's your books always help, but there's nothing that rivals experience. And you just got to be out there in the moment doing it for the experience. So experience is awesome. But if you take your starting the donkey book and working or volunteering at a reputable rescue, then it's kind of the best. You get the best of both worlds when that day comes that you're gonna bring hopefully a couple of donkeys home with you, because like we both said, they very much are partner animals. And these guys are living with 20 Mustangs, and they get turned out with 20 Mustangs, but most of the time they're together. It's just the two of them going along doing their own thing. The horses do their thing, and the donks do their thing. And I've got a couple of horses that like to exercise the donkeys, and it's playful. Again, it's just like, oh, they're just playing, they're having fun. There's no ears pinned back, there's no striking, biting, bucking, any of that. They're just doing little hot laps around the pasture. So it's playful. And then the donkeys will do it themselves, and they'll just be the ones racing around. So, and then it'll be like one of my two horses that I call my gym staff, or my drill sergeants. They're like, oh, you're exercising, I better get you to be exercising. So they're fun to watch, they're fun to be with. So it's awesome. So cool. I'm thinking maybe we start wrapping up this. I don't know, it feels like we've been going for a fair amount of time. Wealth of knowledge. And um if there were three things in this world you could make better, what would they be?
With donkeys or just in
With
general?
well, yes, let's say two with donkeys and one in general.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's a good question. I would say for donkeys, just having people educate themselves, like I was saying, just educate yourself. There's not a whole lot out there on donkeys, which is why I've created educational tools um, for people and why I continue to educate. But there are a few places you can find some good information online and just try to learn, right? Whether, like you said, whether something you think is good or something you're like, not so into that style or that training. Either way, you can learn what you want to do and don't want to do. And just being discerning about that, getting good advice. Um, with donkeys, I'd say I would hope that if anybody learned anything about them or like the general populace is that they're not horses. So they're different. And to respect them for those differences instead of saying, oh, well, I just heard donkeys are stubborn or you're being an ass or whatever.
Right.
I make plenty of ass jokes in my life, but I don't call anybody an ass unless I actually believe that they're good and I like them because I love asses.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it I would say it as a compliment, not as something derisive. So those would be two things, the donkeys, is that like just kind of elevating the respect for them worldwide would be great and more education. So if you're somebody who's a trainer who loves donkeys and really knows a lot about them, any sort of materials you can put out there, whether it's videos or other books that I don't care if you're competing with mine. I want all of the information available. I want people to educate themselves. If it works for you and you're successful with it, I want you to do it so that you can have a good relationship with your donkey, and so that donkeys stay in homes. And then worldwide, I would say that's a really hard one at this point because our world feels a little bit oppressive at the moment. But I think I'd just say I would like for people to think about empathy a little bit more in their daily
Hmm.
lives. Um, Taking a step back and looking at situations and other people with an eye towards kindness and assuming the best from people instead of the worst, which I am guilty of doing. I tend to go to a pessimistic side. It's part of I'm just a pessimist by nature. And so that's something that actually I'm working on right now. So I'm going to say that. I want to start assuming the best of people, and I would hope that others would assume the best of me in most circumstances as well. So I'm going to start putting that out there in the world a little more.
That's awesome. Yeah, I well, let me see if I can come up with a top three, and I'll do it for donkeys too. That they remain in pairs, because they really do need a buddy. I'd say so
Hmm.
even more than horses. They do need a buddy.
Hmm.
Um, that they pair up and stay as a pair would be my number one. Number two is just be willing to learn from them. They are they're these wise old souls. They may be a 2-year old, but they donkeys carry a wisdom that horses. It's a different set of wisdom, but they just they really only ask maybe two or three questions. One is, are you kind? Do I feel safe with you? And if the answer is yes to both of those, then yeah, I'll be with you. We'll go do things together. Not so much don't tell me what to do, but what can we do together? Oh, we want,
Hmm.
you train donkeys to drive and pull carts and all kinds of fun stuff. And they're doing it because you're having fun together. Not
Hmm.
they're not doing it because they are being forced or coerced into it. So I think those are my two donkey things. And for us humans, I wish we'd all just kind of slow down and observe first, and then take that too. How can you kindly approach the worst situation, whatever it be, whether it be war or murder, or 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 you know all the isms, you know lay off all the isms, whether it be racism, sexism, blah 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 isms. It's like, let the isms go. Just be kind, be a good neighbor. And in that, if you can just do that, you know, my neighbor over there that's 10 acres away and my neighbor over there that's an acre away, if you can just be neighborly, and other people might be just two doors down. Oh, that's a good band. Anyhow, you may be living in a high-rise apartment complex, but at least get to know your neighbors and be neighborly. And if everyone was more neighborly instead of my way or the highway, maybe things would just be a little better.
I completely agree. I think that with things the way they are in the world at the moment, and I mean, I say that, but there's always something, right, throughout history. It feels really pretty oppressive at the moment in my lifetime, more so, maybe just because I'm more aware of it as I get older. Um, and I see more people affected by hatred and the isms. But you know, for me, it gets really overwhelming, right? And so, like you said, slowing it down because there's nothing you can do personally unless you're in a position of extreme power to affect everything at once. You're just going to stress yourself out. But in your own little corner of your world, whether you're working with animals and making an animal's life better, whether you're making your neighbor's life better, whether you're making your partner's life better, or just somebody that you meet on the street or in the grocery store, you pick up something for somebody, those little tiny things can really make the difference in somebody else's world or in an animal's world. So just do what you can with what you have. It doesn't need to be huge. It can be a little tiny bit, and you can really affect big change because that affects somebody else. You know, it's kind of a chain that,
Mhm.
that continues of kindness.
That ripple.
So it's a ripple effect, exactly. So even if, like, you know, people say, well, what do you think of this in the world? Or how are you going to affect the world? I said, well, I'm going to do what I can in my little own corner and stay in my lane a little and just do what I can that I know how to do well and continue to do that and do so with kindness and empathy and hope that that ripples out. And I do know that it does because I hear that it does down the line. Sometimes it feels really hard, like it isn't making an effect, but it does. And just know that what you're doing does affect others in a positive way. Um, anyway, it's great to end on that note because I feel like just everything that we're doing, George, we have to believe because a lot of it's hard and a lot of it feels oppressive when you think about, you know, the plight of the BLM horse or wild horse in general, or of the burros or in rescue, it can feel really oppressive. So building ourselves up and feeling good about what we do and feeling that what we're doing is ethical and kind and empathetic and helping people and animals throughout our world and our little section of the world and then, you know, it ripples out is really important to understand because it can feel like you're not affecting that much in your daily mucking about as I'm sloshing through the mud, cussing at the rain, whatever it is that's happening because I got flooded recently. I know you need water. I just have been flooded. I'm hearing more rain coming. I
Mm,
hear thunder and like lightning right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's starting early today. So, because my mud was getting dehydrated, right? So just as I'm doing that, realizing that I'm so lucky to get to do this and
yeah.
that I'm so lucky to get to work with these animals and to meet awesome people like you and discuss these things. So hopefully those who have watched this get something from it and feel like, man, you know, maybe I can do things. Maybe I can affect the world well. Maybe I can work with my animals. Maybe I can learn it. I want people to feel like they can, right? So that's my hope. That's my other hope.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I would say, and for everyone that's whether you're a trainer that's training professionally and making big bucks and you're at the big, you know, the huge, you know, road to the horse or whatever, or Mustang Millions or what have you, from that level to your backyard up and coming trainer, that those high end trainers are stepping out and helping mentor the next generation. And with rescues, that partnerships between rescues is going to be far more successful than every rescue building their own little separate islands because they want
Agree.
those donated. Everyone's fighting over these donated dollars. But
Mhm.
I've always believed that, and I've seen it over here on the Western Slope, that the rescues and equine therapy centers that actually collaborate and work together are the ones that make it through the hard times. And the
Mhm.
ones that are like, oh, I'm going to stay an island and I can't afford to lose Jane, who's my, you know, my number one contributor, that, you know, the rescue would fold if Jane wasn't there and her bank account. But those that are sharing end up in a position where they aren't having to depend on a Jane or a Joe with their big bank account, that there's so many other people involved and everything is working together, that we're not having to hoard our donations, that that in sharing and working together, the funding just kind of shows up. So, and I think that's part manifesting or what have you, or maybe
Mhm.
it's just a healthy energy instead of a hoarding energy. So,
Mhm.
I mean,
I
I think
completely agree.
I feel way more better right now after talking with you for however long this chat has gone than I did earlier this morning.
I feel
And
the
so
same
I'm
way, George. It always makes my heart happy to chat with you.
yeah, and I think we need to extend that out to others and just kind of, rough times don't last forever and good times don't last forever either. And we
Hmm.
don't last forever either. But while we're here making the best of it and helping other people succeed, because if someone else succeeds, it doesn't take anything away from me. I've got someone
Mm-mm.
else that can help now. Maybe it's 50 miles
Exactly.
away, maybe it's 500 miles away, maybe it's in Argentina. I don't know. But
Hmm.
like your books, you've sold across the world. Your
Hmm.
books. So I mean, it's like you've touched somebody in Portugal. I don't know where your books have sold, but I
Oh,
remember
yeah. All
a
over the place,
yeah.
everywhere,
And
basically.
so,
They've gone all over.
that, if you had hoarded that knowledge, so I mean, sharing is caring. All those things we learned in kindergarten, that poem from it's true. I mean, if we would if that was up on, at every courthouse, I would all the things I learned in kindergarten. I mean, that's what you need to get by in life. Be kind and share. So
Mhm. And
anyhow,
I love your theory of we all lift each other up. It's one of my big tenets of my rescue is that I talk a lot about collaborations with other rescues because that is so important to me. And what I've found is that there are some people out there who do rescue that really do have that hoarding mentality. And like, I want to get all the animals and I want to do all the things and I want to keep all the funds for myself and, everybody else is bad. That kind of mentality, it doesn't get you very far over time. It might seem like it in the moment. And maybe if you have really big funders, you'll last for a while. But truly what I've found is that my favorite times in my life and my favorite things about rescue happen because I'm collaborating with another rescue or an individual who is caring. And those connections bring you further, but it also helps more animals. And that's what it's really about, right?
yeah,
Is us helping the animals. But when you can feel good doing it too, that's the icing on the cake, right? Because there's times where you don't feel good about it. I bring in animals that I immediately have to euthanize or whatever it is. There's a lot of hard things. And
yeah,
so enjoying those good things and really taking the time to appreciate them, like our conversation today is so important. So thank you so much, George, for the time chatting with me today. It's definitely lifted me up and made my whole day better. So I appreciate it.
awesome. And I thank you, Rachel Ann, and hopefully you don't get too much rain. Send it this way.
I'm
We
trying,
can
I'm
use
just blowing,
more.
I'm like
Yeah,
blowing it your way.
yeah, awesome. Well, great, much appreciated always, and hope to see you sometime soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George.
Great.
And give those nice asses some scratches for me.
I will. I'll be out scratching my asses.
Perfect. Talk to you later, George.
Okay, thanks a bunch. Bye
You're
bye.
welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.